All right, well, welcome back to our next video tutorial on how to make some quilt block components. This one that we're going to be making this time is this cute little thing. I don't actually know the name of this block that the wider community calls it, but I found it as on a block pattern that's called Windmill that uses four of these in a rotation. So I'm calling this a windmill blade. All right, so if you look at this is kind of an interesting looking thing. It's actually kind of a mashup of a one of the variations of cat's cradles that we've already made and a half square triangle. Let me show you. So here's this variation on a cat's cradle that we made at one point, and there we go. Mash it up with a half square triangle, and you kind of get that thing. I will tell you, I attempted to diagram out a way to make this two at a time and not have waste, and nothing worked. So we are going to make this one at a time, and there will be some waste. So let's get started making this. Let's first go over again some general rules about my tutorials. Remember that as a general rule, my measurements are exact. I don't have you make things oversized to trim down, and that is the case. You're making things to exact measurements. Also, I really don't like sewing unsupported bias seams because it's too easy for them to stretch. So we are using squares and rectangles, and that's why we're going to have waste. If we had just cut all the little triangles and sewed on bias edges, we wouldn't have waste, but then we run the risk of things stretching. So we are cutting squares and rectangles, and there will be a little bit of waste. And just remember that standard practice for all quilt writers, not just me, when we give you a measurement, it is the measurement of the finished size, what you're going to see after you sew it into the quilt. So if I say, let's make a 6-inch, that this block is going to be a 6-inch block, it means you're going to, when you measure it, not put in the quilt, it's going to measure 6.5 for that 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way around. But once you put it in the quilt, you're just going to see 6 inches of it. So just remember, there is a few times in the course of this that I might tell you that you were basing measurements on unfinished sizes, but when those few rare times happen, I will tell you. So let's get started on this. The actual most difficult part of this for me was figuring out how to explain how to cut this. So I have made a diagram, and I've made multiple slides that I will put up in the video, and where you can pause to figure out how to measure things. Here's a printed diagram with letters for reference on each piece. The letters are not telling you what color of fabric to use. They're telling you where the piece goes. So you'll notice that A and F are the same color, B and D are the same color. This is a 4-color block. You possibly could make it more or less colors, I'm not sure. But this is a 4-colored block. All right, so referring to the diagram that's on the screen, let's start off with the small half square triangle that's made out of parts A and parts B. The math on that: divide the finished size of the whole windmill blade unit by 2 and then add 7/8 of an inch. Cut 1 square each of your desired fabrics to this size. For example, for a 6-inch finished windmill block, 6 divided by 2 equals 3. Add 7/8 to get 3 and 7/8. So cut a square of A and a square of B at 3 and 7/8. Do note that this will make 2 half square triangles of this size. You only need 1 per block, but if you need to make a second windmill blade, there you already have it. For triangle C, divide the finished size of the whole windmill block by 2 and then add 1/2 of an inch. Cut 1 square of your desired fabric to this size. For example, for a 6-inch finished windmill blade, 6 divided by 2 is 3. Add 1/2, you get 3.5. So cut a 3.5-inch square of whatever fabric you want to use for triangle C. For triangle D, add 1/2 inch to the desired finished size of your whole windmill blade unit. cut one rectangle using the measurement you used for triangle C for the short side of the rectangle. The long side of the rectangle is the measurement you just found. For a 6-inch finished windmill blade, 6 plus 1/2 is 6.5. That is the long side of your rectangle. The short side will be what you found for triangle C, which was 3.5. So you cut a rectangle to 3.5 by 6.5. For triangles E and F, add 7/8 of an inch to the desired finished size of the whole windmill blade unit and cut one square of each of your desired fabrics. For example, again, for a 6-inch finished windmill blade, 6 plus 7/8, 6 and 7/8. Cut these squares to 6 and 7/8. And note, just like with the AB half square triangle, this will again make 2 EF half square triangles. You only need one for this windmill blade block unit. If you're making a second windmill blade unit, you've already going to have it made. So here are all of the pieces cut and ready to sew. The red and black squares, those are my A and B. The brown square is my C. Then there's a red rectangle that's going to be D, and then the black and white squares are going to be E and F. So let's get to making this windmill blade unit. The first step is really simple. We're going to make an AB half square triangles and EF half square triangles, just 2 at a time, the same way we did for the simple half square triangles tutorial. I will put a link down in the description if you need a refresher on how to do that. The down and dirty is draw a line down the center of one square, stack them together, sew a 1/4 inch on either side of that line, and then cut them apart on the line, open them up, press the seam allowances to one side. So let's zoom through that part of this video. So let's start off with a big note of caution. Everything from this point on in making windmill blades is directional. Before you sew anything, fold the stack of fabric open where the seam's going to be to ensure you've got the correct placement. And then before you either sew the next seam or trim anything, double check it again. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set aside one of the AB half square triangles and one of the EF half square triangles. You only need one of each. You got 2 out of it. You can use the other 2, the remaining ones in a second windmill blade or someplace else. Take your square that's going to be for triangle C. Make sure you've got it on the correct side of the AB half square triangle and sew it together, right sides together, using a 1/4 inch seam. Open this new piece up and press the seam allowances towards square C. Now take the rectangle that you made for piece D and sew it to the correct side of the now ABC piece using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, right sides together. Open this new piece up and press the seam allowances towards rectangle D. This new piece should now be the same size as the EF half square triangle that you already made. All right, now take this piece that you have just made, turn it wrong side up, and draw a diagonal line starting from the piece C corner through the center point and on to the opposite corner that's on piece D. You can do this with any regular quilting rule. A 45-degree angle line does kind of help line it up and make sure everything's going straight. Or you can use the Creative Grids Cat's Cradle tool. I will leave a link to that tool below. I have chosen to use the Cat's Cradle tool. Now place the EF half square triangle right side up on your surface and place this piece ABCD unit that you've just made on top of it, right sides together, stack them up. Now the line you drew is going to be your stitching line. So before you sew, fold the piece open on this line to ensure you have everything turned the correct direction. If you need to turn something, you need to do that now. Also a word of note, your seam will be a little less bulky and it will be easier to make sure that the diagonal seams line up if the seam allowances for the AB half square triangle and the EF half square triangle are pressed opposite directions. That way you can make the seams kiss like you do when you're crossing seams. So before you sew this seam, if they happen to be pressed the same direction, go back and just flip the pressing on the EF half square triangle to press it the other side. Now that you've checked to make sure that you've got everything oriented the correct direction, make sure you fold that back closed and sew on the line that you have made. And then before you do anything else, double check again that your finished piece is going to look like a proper windmill blade. If it is correct, we're great. Keep on going. So you have two options. You can either close it back up and stitch again another 1/2 inch away in the seam allowance side and then cut between the two seams to create a smaller square as demonstrated in the tips and tricks tutorial, and the link will be in the description for that. Or you can just cut off the excess fabric a 1/4 inch away from that seam you made. And remember, the seam allowance side is the side without the small AB half square triangle. Once everything's all done, open your windmill blade, open up your other small square if you made it, press all your seam allowances towards the EF triangles, and voila, you're done.